All right. Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started. So let's just start by just taking a minute to kind of transition. So we're just going to kind of sit comfortably, but with an upright spine, open torso, kind of sitting in a more stable, upright position, but one that is still comfortable for us. And we're just going to take a moment to settle the mind. So start by scanning through the physical body and noticing if you're holding any unnecessary tension. And then just relaxing, letting that go. Keeping the spine straight, but allowing the body to relax into a stable, comfortable position. And let go of needing to be aware of your surroundings, any sights or sounds that might be distracting. Just don't feel the need to send out your awareness. Try to hold your awareness to the body and mind. Start to use the physical sensation that attends the in-breath and the out-breath. Particularly in the area around the nostrils. Just trying to notice that sensation and letting go again and again of anything else that arises in the mind. Thoughts or feelings or plans. Just trying to hold the mind to that one physical sensation. And then on your own, set a virtuous or altruistic motivation for your time. Just recollecting whatever interest you have in spirituality, and then thinking, what would it mean if I were to make progress toward those goals, those interests, and how would that benefit those around me? And think that securing that benefit is one of the principal reasons for our coming together, widening our circle of concern and wanting to develop ourselves to be able to help others. All right. Good afternoon. I think both of you might be new to the course. Is that accurate? Maybe the first time for you guys can unmute or. And did you did you have to put in a passcode to get the link when you clicked on the link? Did it require you to? No, you just got right in. Because we were having some trouble with the Zoom links, so we're not sure of the link behavior. But it just worked. It worked seamlessly. Great. All right. Hello, Valeria.
Hello.
Also, for you, when you clicked it, you just got right in?
Yes, got right in, no problem.
Good. Wasn't sure. Okay. So this is, I don't know, have either of you seen on YouTube the prior videos in this series, or did you just kind of, you happened upon it and you're like, oh, that looks interesting? And so we are kind of toward the end of, these classes are recorded on YouTube. If you want to, if you are interested, you can go back. You can find that link on the homepage on TNLSF. The homepage, there's on the top there's a button for the YouTube channel, or just in YouTube, you can Google Thapten Norbu Ling, and you can find their YouTube channel. These classes, the previous classes in this series are there. But this is class 5 of 6 in this series. So next week will be the last class in this series. And this book, I don't know, have either of you looked at the book that this is based on, or it's in the, no? So there is a, pardon?
I looked at the book, but I don't have it.
So in the class description also, there's a materials link, and then you can take a look. You can get the book if you were interested. That's not required, but if you decide, you can get the book there. So this class is based on that material, the material that's in that book. And we have gone through, a fair amount of that material. But what I can say is that the whole book, it's really trying to help us to think differently about how we conceptualize what it means to be happy. What we've talked about a number of things, over the previous classes, but I think, one of the things that comes up again and again in the book and in Buddhist philosophy in general is the distinction between thinking of happiness as something that happens to a person purely independent upon how successful they are in being in contact with something that's outside of themselves. That is a really common way of thinking about happiness, is thinking about, when I'm able to achieve or accomplish or have or do certain things, then I define that as being happy. And when I'm prevented from being able to have or do or accomplish certain things, then it's almost as though I'm powerless but to define that as being unhappy. And Buddhist philosophy, and in particular this book, is really providing us with a variety of methods to try to help us to not think in those terms, to be able to develop a kind of happiness that is stable and really ultimately is able to not even depend upon what's happening to us, to have a kind of happiness that can just pervade our experience because it's rooted in internal mental states that we carry with us, they're not fickle in the same way. They're not kind of unstable and fickle and capricious in the same way that kind of almost in a way more culturally accepted idea of happiness really is. So it's really about finding techniques and methods that can give rise to a more stable happiness, um, rather than giving up our own contentment to simply whether or not things in our environment are the way that we would otherwise prefer them to be. So I would say that's really the main theme of the book. Did anyone, it's kind of early to ask if anybody has a question, but does anybody have a thought or a question or anything so far? So I guess, we'll just go through. I think that it's fair to say that with this book, the chapters provide a sense of um, wisdom and insight that in a way don't necessarily depend upon the previous material. So I think it's perfectly fine that we can just kind of carry on with where we are in the material. So the next chapter, of course, is called The Mind. Um, and so, and in Buddhism, as I was saying, this is again reinforcing the idea that everything in Buddhism is a mental training. Everything comes back to, and when we say the mind, consciousness or the mind can be used interchangeably. And in Buddhism, I don't know, to what extent maybe you've done some reading in Buddhism, but Buddhism very clearly distinguishes between mind and body. And the assertion is that the mind is an energy, a formless energy that exists prior to the coming together of the body in the womb. And it's something that survives the process that we call death, when the body can no longer support consciousness through, just natural death or injury, what have you, then body and mind separate. So mind, according to the Buddhist view, exists independent from and prior to the coming together of the body. And when the body fails, then body and mind separate, but the mind continues. And so, in that way, the mind is trainable in a completely different way than the body is trainable. We can eat well, we can exercise, but there will come a point when the physical body is kind of at its peak. And then we'll still be sort of subject to aging and, that whole process. And so in many ways, that process is outside of our control. And the parts of it that are inside of our control are limited. We have a certain degree of control, but then there's genetics involved and aging. And so most of it is sort of just chance or biology. But the mind, being a non-physical energy, it's really trainable in a way that is almost, you could say, limitless, which means that the potential of the mind is so much greater than the potential of the body. Again, according to this Buddhist view, that if we embark upon a real, sincere, sustained effort to shape the mind, the results of that are profound. And Buddhism would assert that they even extend beyond this life. We don't have to accept that as true, but that is part of the overall general Buddhist way of thinking, that we kind of inherited, in a way, the things that we were familiar with from past lives, but that in this life, the habits, the familiarities, the things that we train the mind to be accustomed to or familiar with in this life has an effect that carries on into the future. So here, Lama Zopa is giving us a couple of analogies to how we can think about the mind. So, in one way, when I mentioned that we've sort of inherited tendencies and habits, we've also, earlier in this life, we have generated or strengthened those tendencies and those habits. Perhaps we've started new habits or new tendencies, what have you, but it could be that not all of those tendencies and habits are the most beneficial, the most conducive. It could be that some of the familiarities and the habits that we have are getting us into trouble. They are perhaps more self-centered than they are altruistic. They might be, tendencies toward being short-tempered, all of the sorts of things, having a lot of clinging or grasping toward the kinds of things that we enjoy, which brings a lot of tension and tightness to the mind instead of a more spacious, expansive way of being. So those kind of parts of ourselves that we might feel like aren't as useful is like this idea of the mind like the disciple, meaning that it's a bit unruly, the mind, and that we should maybe have some skepticism about the sorts of impulses that we have. And we maybe, instead of impulsively following whatever arises in the mind, we should try to question the impulses and to kind of check and see, what is my motivation in this moment? What is underlying my interest in engaging in one particular course of action or another? So that would be like the guru always teaching, like always looking at the mind and trying to discern with wisdom, am I being motivated in this moment in a way that's helping me to develop those positive tendencies? Or am I being motivated in this moment in a way that might be strengthening some of those tendencies that I feel like aren't in keeping with the ideals that I really have for myself? And then, this is also like the mind, like the child, thinking of the mind as being kind of impulsive. And so here he's saying that we need to be loving and compassionate toward ourselves as we're going about this process of bringing more awareness to what motivates our actions and trying diligently with effort to make better and better better and better decisions or actions that are in line with what we are learning, what we're meditating on, what we're really trying to familiarize ourselves with in our formal spiritual practice. Again, rather than kind of letting the mind, because we know that in our own direct experience, we know that the mind is constantly going here, going there, just getting caught up in dramas and exaggerations. And so this is sort of thinking about, well, my mind is this energy that has this potential for development. And so if I just leave things as they are, then I may only be using this life to strengthen these habits that are not the most beneficial. So, yeah. Any thoughts or questions so far? Or yes.
That was
Mm-hmm.
bringing the love and the compassion to the change. I think that's something we all need to be reminded to be gentle with ourselves.
Anything else? All right. So this is this slide is again looking at this idea, is getting at a deeper philosophical observation in Buddhism that the mind is, it says, naturally pure, inherently without faults. So as I mentioned, and this is something that we've looked at to some degree over the previous classes. I mentioned that we can observe in our own experience that we do have tendencies perhaps toward, again, short-temperedness, toward jealousy, toward these states of mind that we can observe when they arise in our own mind. We can observe that we experience them as uncomfortable. We experience them as painful, really, when the mind is angry, when the mind is jealous, when the mind has thoughts of ill will. It's a painful state. That in and of itself is a suffering state to the person that is experiencing that. And also, those are the kinds of states that often will give rise to conflict between people, and also destruction of the environment, destruction of animals, all kinds of non-harmonious and unskillful and disruptive ways of relating to people, everything. All of those unharmonious and unskillful states or actions or relationships really can be traced back to the arising of these internal mental states that Buddhism calls the afflictions, or the afflictive emotions, or the delusions, or the kleshas. You might, in different books, you'll see different terms, but what they mean is tendencies or habits or ways of thinking that are really painful for oneself and are the motivating force behind unskillful actions that harm others. But it's true that we have it's true that to some degree we have those tendencies. But what Lama Zopa here is saying, that the mind itself is without faults. But we would say, well, that's not my experience. We would say, but I don't see that for myself. But that's because these tendencies are clouding that deeper natural purity of the mind. What he says here, this ultimate nature of the mind is Buddha nature, and this is what makes it possible for us to achieve enlightenment. So what he's saying here, and this is again a very complex philosophical idea, but what he's saying is that the mind itself is not oneness with those painful states. And it would take many hours to kind of go into a lot of depth on this point. But these painful states, Buddhism suggests, are all based in misunderstanding the way that things exist. And that this misapprehension of the way in which things exist causes these painful states to arise. But that misunderstanding can be corrected. And because it can be corrected, it's not baked into the mind itself. It's kind of like a faulty software program that with wisdom we can change, we can correct. And all we really have to do is that correction. And once we do that correction, then the mind is free of all of those painful states. And that kind of freedom is, in English, enlightenment. Once we do that, once we correct that misunderstanding, then the mind functions in a very different way, and we call that different way of functioning enlightenment. And that way of functioning is completely devoid of all of those limited, suffering, painful experiences that are the result of that previous misunderstanding. But again,
the recording has stopped.
What did I do?
This meeting is being recorded.
Sorry, I must have done something. Yeah. So that's what he's getting at there. So of course, this ultimate nature of the mind is not, it's a deeper level of the mind than the level where these kind of faulty ideas, these faulty ways of thinking are operating. They operate on a coarse level of the mind. And what Lama Zopa is getting at is that at a really deep level of the mind, those misunderstandings become reduced, and then through wisdom, we can really purify those completely. Any thoughts or questions so far? Of course, as I mentioned, this topic is studied by Buddhists for decades. It's a very complicated topic. But it's very, I think, empowering. It's very uplifting, I think, to recognize that although I experience my mind in a way that is limited, and in a way where these painful states kind of arise again and again, these painful states only arise because certain causes and conditions are present in my mind that are empowering them. And I can create different causes and conditions, and then that no longer will be my experience. So here he's just kind of going into a little bit more detail on this, because as I mentioned, the mind has all of these levels, and at its most basic, the mind is described in Buddhism as just that which is clear and knowing, that which possesses. So clarity again refers to not freedom from misunderstanding, but it refers to that idea of formless energy. And then knowing, again, doesn't refer to knowing completely accurately, but it refers to the ability to know, the ability to generate awareness of what the mind is directed toward. So in Buddhism, that is the fundamental definition of consciousness, that which is clear and knowing, or that which possesses clarity and awareness. And clarity and awareness don't require or have, again, they don't, the painful states that we're talking about, clarity and awareness are different from them. They are kind of a part of the mind, but they're separable. They are what's called adventitious. They are not oneness with this essential characteristic of the mind, which is simply that which is clear and knowing. So he says, even the subtle obscurations, even the barest kind of obscurations are completely removable from the mind. And when we do that, we achieve full enlightenment, just like, what the Buddha did and everything that the Buddha taught. All of the Buddha's teachings are designed, of course, not everyone, many people may never relate to the Buddhist teachings with the goal of achieving enlightenment. That's a very personal decision. Many people are going to use aspects of the Buddhist teachings to improve their own lives. And that's a completely valid way of relating to the teachings. But I think it can be very inspiring to try to keep coming back to a really expansive understanding of the mind. One that isn't so limited. Any thoughts or questions? So the next chapter he is called Work, and here he means like ideas about how to hold the mind when we are at work, when we're going about, when we go to work. How can we, again, so going back to kind of what I said at the very beginning of the class, how do we start to think about every moment of our day as part of the process of developing our qualities such that that pervasive contentment and happiness can persist and isn't fickle and capricious, like as I was saying. So, of course, work is something, we spend probably, I don't know, more than half our waking hours probably engaged in some kind of work. And many people are doing things that they're not necessarily the most excited about, and work can pose many different challenges. It can cause stress, it can cause anxiety, and so if we don't try to transform that block of our life that takes up so much of our time, then we are missing out really on an incredible opportunity to think differently, about looking at all of our lives, not just thinking about, well, spirituality is when I'm studying or when I'm meditating, but really spirituality is when I'm talking, when I'm answering the phone at work, or when I'm helping a coworker, or helping a client with something. That is really putting what I'm doing in what I'm becoming familiar with in my formal spiritual life, meditating or studying. I have to put that into practice at work. And if I don't do that, if I'm not really reinforcing that, then I'm not using all of my life in the best way. So he's going to give us a number of things to think about for that. So Lama Zopa, I think, is really known for his teachings are really known for being really direct and really forceful and really getting at the heart of things. So here he's saying that, it doesn't matter what we do for a living. He's saying that whether we're selling insurance or selling clothing or repairing telephone lines, it doesn't matter. If we go to work every day with this kind of aspiration, whatever services, whatever it is I'm doing, whatever skills, whatever abilities, I'm doing it to pacify all their suffering and bring them happiness. Of course, that isn't to say that a person's suffering is going to be completely pacified by being kind to them on the phone or what have you. But we think internally, this is a mental training. This is a way of internally trying to relate to what it is that we're doing. And so we're trying to think, what is my contribution to completely pacifying all their suffering in this moment? In this moment, I have a choice to either make a contribution to bringing them happiness and pacifying their suffering, or exacerbating their suffering and not caring about their happiness. And so how can I reflect on my own motivation and think, this person that's before me, what in this moment will contribute to that goal? What choice can I make right now with this person I'm speaking to or helping in some way that is a contribution like that? And if what he's getting at here is if we can hold the mind in that kind of way of thinking, going to work, being at work, at the grocery store, whatever, with our family, then that will bring us the greatest source of contentment and real peace, because we will be pacifying those painful states. We will be giving ourselves the medicine that reduces those painful states, like jealousy, like ill will. All of those states are kind of the opposite of this intention. They're based on a selfish, egoistic concern. And so actively cultivating this kind of motivation is the direct antidote to what gives rise to those painful states. And it's those painful states that are the reason that we don't persist in a state of contentment. So we will, in that moment, of course, we're still going to make mistakes. No one's saying that we will immediately stop. We also have to be realistic with ourselves and recognize that those tendencies are, relatively deeply ingrained, and it will take a long time to reverse course, but we can start. We can start every day trying to develop new tendencies and new habits. And that even if we kind of artificially, in the morning or before we get out of the car to go into work, sort of have to give ourselves some instruction, if we do that a lot, it will no longer be artificial. If we do that a lot, it will start to really sink into the mind, and then it will just be a natural expression eventually of how we relate to others. Because what Buddhism points out is that we have those constricted suffering states simply because we're quite familiar with that way of relating. And we can have expansive, contented states if we simply become deeply familiar with that way of relating. So this whole process of training the mind is not different than the way that we learn any new skill, any new ability. It just takes time and effort and the right methods. But those results, the results that we can see in the Buddha, in all the great masters, those results are not a fluke. They're not something unique about those specific people. They are the end result of a reliable and repeatable process that we just have not yet fully developed in our minds. And this particular way of thinking starts to go a long way toward moving us in that direction. Any thoughts or questions? So again, this is also part of what I was saying about the things that Lama Zopa encourages us to do are difficult, and they flip our tendencies and our habits. So it's a real challenge for us to cultivate this attitude that I'm here for others to make use of. We kind of think I'm here to get a paycheck so that I can do the things with that money that I like, and that's my real reason. Particularly if we're not that jazzed about many of the tasks that are part of our job. We just kind of think of it as this thing that we have to get through in order to pay our rent and go on vacation. But again, what I think what he's pointing out is that way of thinking is a lost opportunity for cultivating our own, cultivating the things that we would really like to be able to cultivate. And if we can try to start cultivating the attitude that I'm just sort of here to try to be a solution, that's for, I'm not saying that I've made any progress, with this particular way of thinking, but the way that in my life, that I try to think about this instruction is, how can I be a solution? Like, what can I, in whatever problem is arising, what is it that I can bring to this that, and of course, I make all kinds of mistakes and I make things worse, and, all of this sort of things ordinary people do. But when I was reading, when I've been reading about this and when I've been exposed to this, the way that I've tried to think about it just in my mind is like that. Like, I'm here to try to be a solution, to whatever is needed, to whatever's going on. So how can I plug myself in to make it work a little bit better? And so here he's saying that again, everything that we do with that attitude is a pleasure. It doesn't cause anxiety or distress, because we've beaten down the self-centered attitude, the egoistic lens that we were previously using to navigate that experience. We've reduced that perspective, and our perspective now is much broader. It's much more spacious, and so we're not out for ourselves. We're just sort of like, so I'm just showing up to be like, what can I do that's helpful? And then we just try to do that. We just try to carry on like, okay, this is a new day, a new set of challenges, a new set of experiences. What is it that I can do that's helpful in that environment? And when we can keep ourselves in that attitude, then things are kind of easier and they flow better, and there's less disconnection between ourselves and others. Any thoughts or questions? So the last chapter that we'll look at here is called love. And in Buddhism, love, the English word love, is a translation of a particular word, Maitri. And the definition of love is the wish for oneself and all other sentient beings to have happiness and the causes of happiness. So here he's going to give us, he's going to encourage us, as you may have seen in Buddhist writings in general, loving kindness, loving concern is something that we're really meant to try to cultivate. So here he's going to focus on this way of thinking about bringing that attitude to our interactions and our relationships. So here we've talked in earlier classes about, in a way, about this idea, and in a way, how this is a little bit different than, here he's getting at kind of what is real self-love, what is real self-care, and how this can differ from, again, these sort of cultural views that we may have adopted of these same ideas, how we might need to rethink these ideas. Here he's saying, so many times we think of self-care as like a spa day, or I'm stressed out, so I need to watch a movie, or I need to put on an album, or I need to, get the right kind of meal to eat. If it's not the right kind of meal, then I'm going to continue to be anxious or stressed out. That's the right kind of antidote. Those ideas that we've kind of been taught really by society and by our culture, and really by the fact that those are the easiest things to try to do. Those are the coarsest or simplest kind of go-to antidotes, because they can release some dopamine, they can release some serotonin, they can kind of have a physiological effect. And then we're like, oh, that physiological effect is kind of cool. So then next time that stress arises, we're like, well, okay, what did I do last time? I ate some chocolate, or I watched a movie, and so we just do that again. And then we get stressed out and we do it again. And we never really investigate what might I be able to do that's actually much more effective? It maybe in a way might take more effort, but it will really actually work in a deeper way. So here he's saying that cultivating these positive states really is self-care. And if allowing these painful states to go unchecked, to just run rampant, to again not have that view of the mind like a disciple, the mind like a child, not trying to have any interest in actively cultivating positive states, that is the problem. And the real way to take care of the mind is, instead of watching that movie or what have you, it's to do a meditation on love, or a meditation on compassion, or, practicing patience, or because in a way, a lot of those same physiological effects still happen. I mean, it's still quite a restorative and pleasant activity, but also Buddhism would describe that as really just a side effect. The main thing is that we use that time to learn how to think differently about our lives, and about how we make decisions, and what we're going to bring to our interactions with others. And so that is the vehicle for real inner transformation, is study and meditation. Buddhism would suggest that is the real vehicle, but then that vehicle has to be nourished in daily life by recollecting again and again, and trying to notice, well, okay, this morning I meditated on love, but then I lost my temper. And so tonight I'm going to meditate on what would have happened had I not lost my temper. What would it have been like if I had, taken a moment and not said that unkind thing? What would have happened had I recollected all of the times that that person had shown me kindness, instead of all of the times that that person had shown me unkindness? Or what would have happened if I had recollected the kindness that I've seen them show to other people? Even if they've never been kind to me, maybe I can recollect that they've been kind to their children, or, whatever good qualities they have. If I can remember those, then maybe I can remind myself that they have the capacity to grow those good qualities, that that the painful states that maybe they've acted out of toward me, perhaps, that cause me to resent them, or cause me to, for one, I also have those states in my mind. And so I can try to have an attitude of forgiveness, because, you know, I'm not different from them. I also get jealous. I also have unkind thoughts. But I can also see that they have the seeds to develop their mind, just like I have the seeds or the potential to develop my mind. And by spending time, ideally every day, doing these sessions of meditation where we're holding the mind in these really constructive habits, these constructive habits become part of the mind eventually, gradually, over time. And then naturally and spontaneously, they become who we are. Those familiarities and those habits just get integrated so deeply that we naturally relate to others like that. It's not, we don't have to fake it. We don't have to intentionally remember, or, it just flows. Any thoughts or questions?
I have a question.
Mhm.
What if the case is you keep forgetting forgiving someone continuously and they keep doing the same thing over and over again, how do you go about it? Do you just separate yourself from the person, or do you keep accepting their bad attitude?
So I would say that Buddhism, the main thing, of course, it's true that we have to recognize that our capacity right now is only what it is. We're at a certain point. And so there are certain things that might be outside of our capacity at the moment, right now. And so there are a variety of things. One is that we should try to, it isn't to say that we need to allow them to engage in harmful actions. Buddhism never really would suggest that there's something wrong with pointing out to this person, calmly, patiently, without malice, without, that their behaviors are negatively impacting you, and that you find them, that you have certain expectations and certain boundaries, and that you feel like those expectations and those boundaries are very reasonable, and to kind of, if possible, have a dialogue and to see if that can change things, if they can become more aware of how they're influencing you. And then, but it may be that their habits, their familiarities with short-temperedness or whatever it might be are so strong, so ingrained that, or some people, have things that tend maybe even toward like mental illness or, personality, things that are diagnosable to one degree or another, so that can be certainly a factor. There can be addictive things that can be a factor that people don't have a real handle on. So to some degree, whether it's reasonable or unreasonable from our perspective, they might be struggling with something that they're just not going to get a handle on, even if we think that it's quite reasonable to expect that they will. So the main thing is to try to think of them as a suffering sentient being who just can't overcome what's happening, whatever this tendency, whatever this habit is. And really, and then doing meditation, doing loving kindness meditations for that person, sending them out positive, loving energy in meditation, recollecting again and again and again that these traits that you find really challenging, again, like we said, are not in the nature of their mind at its core, at its root. And it could be that all of those methods at some point, hopefully they will help you, but it may take a long time, because, we are where we are and their behaviors are what they are. But it's absolutely not the case that the idea is that we have to allow ourselves to be mistreated. That's absolutely not something that you find in Buddhism. It could be that we do need to separate ourselves from that dynamic. That is entirely possible. And while we're doing that, to the extent that we can, we just keep trying to work the problem. We keep trying to transform our mind, because it's true that we can approach that person and we can explain and we can ask, but we have no access to their mind. And they might not have sufficient access to their mind. We know how difficult it is for us to change habits and tendencies. And so if we want to have a better, different relationship, it may have to come from our side. And eventually, Buddhism points out that that all people, all ordinary people, relate to their own identity in a very solid and very concrete way. And we talked about that last week, if you want, for people who weren't here. And so there are also trainings in Buddhism for eventually, gradually, slowly trying to soften the way that we relate to our own identity. And when we're more successful with that, then other people's behavior actually bothers us less. We can kind of just see it as, well, this is what's arising in their mind. It has nothing to do with me. And it's kind of like there's nothing, ultimately, Buddhism would say that really there's nothing for that arrow to pierce. There's really nothing here that their words or their actions, the idea, but this is one of these things that's not our experience, right? Like this is getting at a spiritual truth or realization that's incredibly difficult to generate in our own mind, because we do feel like I've been wounded. We do feel that there is something here that is woundable. But Buddhism does point out that ultimately, really, there isn't. But still, even at that point, a person might enforce a boundary out of concern for the other person's karma, out of concern for the tendencies and the habits that they are developing by harming people. But that kind of altruistic motivation probably really isn't our motivation. We have to be honest with ourselves, and we really have to, well, I'm not asking them to do this primarily because I'm concerned about their well-being. We're really concerned about, but again, that's totally reasonable. Like that, no one's saying that's unreasonable. That's everyone's ordinary experience, because we do feel wounded, because we do feel like there really is something here that was hurt. But there are ways of softening that relationship. And that really is effective, but it's also incredibly challenging and difficult. So that might be all I can say without, we could talk about that for hours and hours, but we don't have any more time. Did that kind of answer your question a little bit?
Yes.
Okay. So we do have to kind of leave it there for today, but there is one more class next week. And so we will, we'll meet here again next week, hopefully. So at the end of our classes, we do what's called dedication, which just means that we try to think about that we created a virtuous motivation, and then we engaged in actions that were motivated by virtue. And so we just think, whatever positive energy in my mind I've created, I offer that for the benefit of all sentient beings. We just give it away. And just think, if we have some idea of enlightenment, some wish to achieve enlightenment, then we think, may that positive energy ripen as a principal cause and condition for my achieving of enlightenment. And I want to achieve enlightenment so that I can benefit others. But really, the main thing is to just think about offering it, thinking about dedicating it for the benefit of others. So in whatever way you can relate to that, just try to give that energy away.